For National Volunteer Month, we turned the tables on our podcast host, Viannca Velez, class of 2010. On this episode of the Pirate's Eye podcast, our Assistant Director for Alumni Communication and Digital Engagement, Aaron Smith, flips the script and interviews our beloved podcast host to hear about her journey at Seton Hall as well as her experiences volunteering now as an alumna. Take a listen.
Today, I'm switching seats. That's right. After years of being the one to interview alumni of all decades and walks of life, I get to sit in the Pirate's Eye alumni guest chair. And leading the way as a show host is Aaron Smith, Assistant Director of Alumni Communications and Digital Engagement at Seton Hall University. Aaron, thanks so much for being our special guest host today and for taking the time to interview me.
No, thank you, Viannca, for allowing me to interview you and to being the guest host for this podcast. It feels amazing, and let's get into it.
My pleasure.
So our listeners know you as a show host, but today I'm excited to dive in and learn more about your Seton Hall journey as a student, as a former employee, and as a volunteer throughout the years. So again, thank you so much for being our guest today. So our audience knows you as the host of this podcast, which you launched while you were Director of Alumni Communications and Digital Engagement at 2020 at Seton Hall University. But your relationship with the university began way before that. As a class graduate of the class of 2010, can you bring us back into the early days of your journey at Seton Hall, and what was your experience like as a student?
Wow, so hard I don't think that we have enough time for me to talk about my experience as a student, but it was great. Being at Seton Hall, so I was at Seton Hall, yes, I graduated in 2010. I'm from Jersey City, so it's not far, but I did dorm at Seton Hall. So in 2006, I started my journey at Seton Hall. I left Jersey City. I moved all the way to South Orange, which is much more suburban.
Yeah.
And it was a major shift for me. I mean, it's kind of funny because it's really not far at all. But having come from Jersey City and having moved to South Orange and having been on campus, it was very, very different. I'm also first generation, so I didn't exactly know what I was going into. And so I would say that from my experience, the first piece was kind of this shock. I was lucky that I did know people already at Seton Hall. So it was a little bit of an easier adjustment. My roommate and best friend was the person that came from high school with me over to Seton Hall. Her name is Jackie Rivera. And so we went into it together. So at least I had a kind of system of support already in place, but it was a major shift. And so a really big part of my student experience, and anybody that knows me knows that I'm immediately going to start talking about Adelante when I start talking about Seton Hall. So at Seton Hall, immediately I found the Latina Student Organization, which is called Adelante. And I jumped into it pretty early on, and I never left, ever. Like I never left it. Like I'm still in it. And it was amazing because it was where I found a sense of community. Like I said, it was a major shift for me to have left Jersey City and to have gone to Seton Hall. So when I found Adelante and I found this group of students who understood me, who had similar lived experiences as me, and who wanted to get together and who wanted to learn more about their culture and their identity and other cultures and identities and have that exchange, it was really a beautiful, like sacred space to me. Mm-hmm. So that was a really big marker in my Seton Hall experience, but it wasn't the only one. I went to Seton Hall for broadcasting and visual media. Nice. And so I also was part of Pirate TV, and I worked there as a work study in the communications department. I was part of the Student Activities Board, and I was also part of NCBI, National Coalition Building Institute, during my time there. All of those experiences shaped me and transformed me in some way or the other. And so Seton Hall for me as a student was a place where I found community. It was a place where I created community too, because I was part of the building of that. It was a place in where I experienced a lot of growth, mental, emotional, obviously, in terms of academics and career. But I would say that the value of Seton Hall, when I look back, was less about the academic, although that was super important to me, and more so about the emotional, mental, spiritual, communal growth that I experienced while I was there.
Mm. You touched about growth a lot. Can you get a little bit more into that spiritual growth? I know, at least with myself, going in from a high school environment from Clifton, New Jersey, I kind of stayed in my own hometown, and going when I went to Montclair State, I want to know that difference of when you come to a private school where a lot of people, just how you mentioned, don't really know that path when they went and joined Adelante. Talk about finding that spiritual growth a little bit more about Adelante.
Yeah, so my growth is one that it came from a lot of different places, but something that was really important to me growing as a person was both through Adelante, but I would even say more so NCBI,
Mm,
which for folks who don't know, NCBI at the time, I think it still has the same model, but at the time created these spaces in which we were in a structured environment meant to build community, build coalition, to break down silos within different communities, to defeat stereotypes, to really be able to understand how to see each other. Both those groups that are similar walks of life with of you, similar lived experiences, and groups that don't, right? It's groups that you don't know what it's like to be walking their path. And NCBI brought us together and taught us how to break down barriers, how to break down walls, how to communicate properly, how to move away from stereotypes. And in those spaces is where I would say that I experienced some of the most growth. NCBI provided a space where I experienced growth in so many different types of ways and healing, right? Like NCBI was meant to, when you went through the process, the deeper you got in your growth and in your healing, right? So, and I know it wasn't just me, a lot of the folks that went through the program with me also had similar experiences, and we bonded in that way. So when I went through that program, I also joined the different caucuses that were there. So
mm,
NCBI had the Women's Caucus and it had the Latino Caucus, and we would have these retreats. And it was just such a phenomenal space. And I really want to name Rosario Reyes, who at the time was the administrator leading that effort. And she created really beautiful experiences in which those of us who were involved could get down into like trauma and get down into some of the things that we experience that are a weight on us and let it go. And so when I talk
mm,
about growth, both in Adelante and both and NCBI, or just growth at Seton Hall in general, is there's so many different ways. But I would say that that space was one of the most meaningful spaces for me to really kind of break free and come into myself and to understand why we are how we are, and maybe how to better connect with someone who I don't understand, someone who doesn't look like me, or someone who hasn't lived a life like me. How do I try to understand them better? And CBI taught me that, and it also taught me how do I understand myself better, and how
mhm.
do I heal from some of the things that I didn't even know I was experiencing pain from.
Mm. I relate so much to that, just being a person of color and having that background of where you notice it once you get into the corporate spaces or in the different worlds where it's not that many of us in these positions. So learning how to navigate that space can be a challenge for a lot of people. And I think just you sharing the fact that you kind of dealt with this in these different groups while growing up in college, where you're becoming yourself, where you're like, okay, now I know how to navigate this world just from experience from other people or just learning it from yourself. So that kind of transitions me a little bit when I think of let's talk about your career path, right? So you find yourself here at Seton Hall, but how did all the groups.
I put myself there at Seton Hall.
Oh, you did? There you go. There you go.
I didn't find myself there.
I like that. So tell me now, like, how did that get you to where you are now?
Yeah. So in terms of my career, like I mentioned, I went to Seton Hall for broadcasting and visual media.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in with the goal of becoming a journalist and on the record, on camera, or on the radio journalist, broadcast journalist. So I spent a lot of my time, beyond everything I just mentioned about what my student experience was like, I spent a lot of my time doing different internships. So I worked at a small television network that was broadcasting cultural programming, mostly focused on the South Asian community. I worked at a Spanish language television station called Mega TV under the tutelage of Maria Santana, who's now a CNN correspondent.
Oh, yeah.
Taught me a lot about what I know in terms of interviewing, in terms of capturing the story and finding what is the story and how do you present it. I worked at I must have left Seton Hall with maybe like 6 different internships. Which to me was a lot. I don't know how students are doing it now, how many internships they're doing, but I racked up the internships. I came out with 6 internships, all related to my career. So my first real career job was at Fios One News as a video journalist for a show called Push Pause. Fios One News, I don't think is around anymore, or at least definitely not the show. But Fios One News was like a competitor to New Jersey 12, New York 1. They're hyper local focused news. And that one was specifically for subscribers of Fios television. So I was a journalist, a video journalist. I was shooting my own stories. I was pitching my own stories. I was editing my own stories, voicing them over. So I was at the time, what was called a one-man band. And I was doing 3 stories a week that were airing on Fios One News Long Island. And that was a really important role for me in shaping just who I wanted to be as a storyteller, and honing in on the craft of a storyteller, right? So I did that. I didn't want to stay on Long Island. I'm a Jersey City girl. So if I'm not in Jersey City, then I'm, in Puerto Rico, my home island. But so I didn't want to be on Long Island. So I left Long Island. I came back to these sides, and I joined SNY, which is the sports network that covers the Mets.
Yep.
And I worked in the studio for a while. That was studio work. That was like running prompters, doing audio, things like that. And simultaneously, I started working at what was one of my internships. They later hired me, and I started working at New Generation Latino Media, which is called NGL, which is now NGL Collective, which is partnered with a network or company called Me Too. Anyway, that was all Latino digital media marketing. So that gave me an opportunity to learn a different side of storytelling from the more marketing centric side of things. Later, it takes me to working in the nonprofit world, and I started working at my alma mater high school, Marist High School, in Bayonne, New Jersey, which has since closed. And I end up taking all of those skills that I learned at Fios, and in particular at NGL, also from SNY too, but mostly from Fios and NGL. I take those marketing skills and I take those storytelling skills, and I bring them to Marist High School, where I'm working in the advancement office, and I'm doing communications and I'm doing fundraising. And the reason that kind of transferred over is because when you're doing these things, when you're working with alumni, the story is really important.
Yep.
The alumni's story is really important. The story of our alumni, that's what they want to share. That's what you want to share when you're talking to people who are interested in coming to the institution, right? Our stories are everything. Our stories are so important. They shape our narrative. They shape so many different things, right? They shape our perceptions. So I was able to come to Marist and bring my storytelling experience and my storytelling abilities to create video campaigns, and to work in the communications department. Well, the advancement department as the communications person. And then I moved to Seton Hall.
Okay.
So from Marist, I take that experience. I move on to Seton Hall, another alma mater, and I worked there for nearly 6 years. And same thing. I wanted to bring my storytelling, and I wanted to bring a way of being able to represent and capture the wide variety of alumni stories that exist within
Hmm.
Seton Hall and present them back to that community, right?
Yeah.
And so something that was always really important to me when I was working at any of the places I was working is making sure that like we're really thinking through what we're presenting as narratives and stories. And for institutions like Seton Hall, making sure that we're being really representative of the folks that are reading it, and or exposing folks to stories that they're not familiar with. They're stories that they didn't live, different lived experiences.
Hmm.
And yeah, and so that's my early career beginnings all the way till when I was at Seton Hall.
Well, first, I want to give you a round of applause. For 6 years of anything, for at least my generation, sounds scary. So, I'm like 6 years at a company. Don't tell my boss that, but I don't know. But
It's different. 6 years these days is like putting in a decade and looking for a pension. But yeah, 6 years, it went by quick. And it was in those 6 years I was promoted, so I did have, kind of a shift and a change up.
okay.
And the departments changed tremendously as well. Leadership changed while I was there at Seton Hall. So certainly it was a dynamic 6 years.
Wow. So that actually brings me to my next one for you, right? So while you're here at Seton Hall University, I kind of, at least with my first glance here, even before I saw it, I kind of get the perception of this is where it's more traditional here. Like you're not going to get all the, even though it's great in terms of innovative ideas we have, but in terms of some of the marketing, how innovative was it always? But now, what in your mind when you're here, you're like, you know what? Let me start a pirate podcast. What did that happen for you? Like when you said, let's start this pirate podcast?
So actually, it happened for me much earlier than when it started.
Oh,
But it's really easy. There's a couple of different pieces to this.
yeah.
One is that I was writing these profile pieces, which were already called Pirate's Eye. That was inherited. That was something that the advancement department already had, or the alumni engagement department already had in place, and I inherited it. And so I was every month highlighting an alum, and that was a written form piece.
Mhm.
And so after a while, I started thinking, okay, well, we're doing these written pieces monthly. Other departments are also doing written pieces on alumni. The magazine is also written piece. And on the other side of that, we were doing video pieces. And it was a time in which this department wanted to explore more video storytelling, right? That was the movement. And our gala had video storytelling in it. And so it was like one spectrum and the other side of a spectrum. So we were doing written profile pieces and we were doing video storytelling. And so it occurred to me, and with my broadcasting background, one, it was I wanted to use that background. I
Mhm.
enjoy storytelling. I enjoy using my voice for storytelling. I enjoy the dynamic of live conversation, of Q&A, which is a little different when you're doing it for a written piece, right? You're still doing a Q&A, but it's just not the same dynamic. And so I wanted to utilize that skill set that I have. And I also wanted to create a different medium for alumni stories within the department. So
Mhm.
if we were doing video and we were doing written, let's jump in and do podcast. And it was at the time where podcasts were really like taking off. And it still is, but it was super simple to put together, and it was exciting and it felt fresh. In 2019, I had launched my own podcast,
Okay.
and I was like, this is pretty easy. And so I wanted to then take that and bring it to Seton Hall. So I, at the time, was my supervisor was Anthony Bellucci. And so I pitched it and he was like, sounds great. Let's do it. He was totally down. And so we kicked it off. And it was interesting the timing in which we kicked it off, because immediately after the first episode launched, we went into the pandemic. And so when we went into the pandemic and we went into that shutdown, all things digital, all things virtual just, exploded, right?
Yeah.
Like it became the way to stay connected. So it was such a timely thing to have launched the podcast. I think it was February of 2020. And then in March,
Wow. I'm right
when the
before it.
pandemic, yeah, it was right. It was a month before. And when the pandemic hit, then it gave it even more space, I guess. Like it became something that was like, okay, this was a good idea. Now it's even more important to really push onto this like podcast, because
Mhm.
every way that we're going to stay connected for the, who knows how long future at that time is going to be digital.
Yep.
And yeah, and here I am a few years later, still running the podcast.
Still
It's been
doing
fun.
it.
It's been fun.
Yeah. But that actually brings me to another thing where, in my experience, in my short experience in the corporate world and nonprofits, whatever you may call it, I had run into bosses or managers where they were just so unwilling to do things. Talk about the importance of having a manager like Anthony, where it's just like he was like, you know what, go ahead and do it. Let's see what happens. How does that make an impact in building a podcast or any creative idea?
I mean, it's critical, right? And I will say that in my experience at Seton Hall, I had a number of supervisors, namely Matthew Borowick and Anthony Bellucci are the two kind of official supervisors that I had. I had some interim supervisors in between as well.
Mhm.
And all of them really instilled this trust in my ability
Nice.
to take my strategy and execute it, right? So if I feel like that's important, right? When you're in the workplace, and not just at Seton Hall, in any workplace, when
Yeah.
you hire someone and you say that you're hiring them because they come with this experience, because they come with this expertise, and that person then wants to create a strategy based in that, you do have to have some trust in them to execute.
Mm-hmm.
That is why you hired them. And I feel that during my time at Seton Hall, I was that message was reinforced, right? I was validated in that way, in that from my direct supervisors, in that if I have an idea, if I think that this is the way that we should move forward, almost always it was like, okay, then let's move forward. And what I needed from them, they also provided in terms of like, okay, what do you need? Do you need guidance? Do you need resources? Because I may have an idea and I may want to execute, but I still may need a little bit of, direction
Mm-hmm.
or someone to bounce an idea off of and say, like, this is the idea. What are the concerns or the considerations? What am I not seeing? Maybe, right? Like, is there a hurdle on the road that I'm missing that I might hit and then stumble? And I think that that's important for supervisors to do, like, right, to help you walk through that path.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get hired for someone and you for something and you have that ability, what you do want is the trust in being able to do it. And when you get the trust, then you feel more motivated to do it. And that's exactly what happened with the podcast. It was like, yes, I got the stamp, I got the green light, and then I was like, yeah, I want to make this good. I
Mm-hmm.
want this to be good because I pitched it and I got a green light. And if I don't make it good, then why did I pitch it in the first place?
No, that's the key word right there. That motivation, having like a leader and you're working for, say, hey, listen, I believe you. You just got to do it. It makes you go like, you know what, I want to do this now. Versus like having that one person that's always trying to beat you down. So I relate a lot to that. So let's bring it on to where you currently are working, right? You're the director of comms at the Caribbean Culture Center African Diaspora Institute in New York City. So, as a leader in that role, can you tell me about your current experiences and how you uplift and bring new ideas help encourage your staff to bring new ideas to the table?
Yeah, so the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute in East Harlem is short, well, is long for CCCADI. So we shorten it and we say CCCADI, or we call it GABI because I know it's a long name, it's a mouthful. Um, as the director of operations, as the director of communications there, I oversee the digital engagement. I oversee all of the mass communications. And what's really fun about that role is that we are anchored in cultural programming, right?
Mhm.
And we're anchored in cultural programming specifically for African descendant communities, wherever they may be, right? So the work that we do is to look at the common thread between African descendant communities, be it in the Caribbean, North America, South America, Europe, and that's what diaspora means, right? Like that
Yeah.
dispersal of a people. And what are the ways in which that people influenced the various cultures? So when we talk about communications in
Mhm.
that way, we're talking about, and we talk about storytelling,
Yeah.
we're really talking about some very rich storytelling because we're looking at stories that have to do with a complex, complicated past, right?
Mhm.
African descendant communities, we are talking about stories of slavery and oppression and generational trauma. But we're
Yeah.
also talking about generations of retention, of resilience, of cultural preservation through oral traditions. So it is really fun for me to be the lead storyteller at an organization that also so heavily values oral traditions, right? And I say all of that to say that the team does a really good job of thinking through, how do we do this digitally? How do we do this in person? How do we
Mhm.
do this across all mediums? And how do we tell all of these different stories
Yeah.
but connect them together? And so that looks like, I don't even know where to begin. I wouldn't even be able to tell you the amazing and creative ways in which the team that I work with has put together all of these different storytelling projects. But it looks like campaigns on social media. It looks like series of virtual conversations. It
Mhm.
looks like exhibitions, and it looks like interviews. It looks like holding space to just talk through intergenerationally, holding
Mhm.
space where elders can share with youth and children, and we can focus on different cultural aspects that really make an identity.
Mhm.
And so the team there is just incredibly creative. And so if you want to get a glimpse of like what we're talking about in terms of storytelling and mediums and creativity, and you know to the gist of your question, then I would definitely invite you to, one, come to the space in East
Okay.
Harlem, 125th,
One day.
and two, I would definitely tell you to check out cccadi.org, the website, and cccadi on Instagram, and you'll just see like the fresh, innovative things that the team is doing.
Everybody, that was a shameless plug. So please go on Instagram right
Shameless,
now,
it's
but leave the
totally shameless.
podcast going. But go on Instagram on the side, look at
Do a
it.
little scrolling.
So that okay. So what do you find time like just for it all? Like I did my research on you, and I'm like, all right. So you're director of comms. Any director position is just all. I see my director. She goes crazy.
It's
Now
demanding.
it's like how okay, so you're still serving and volunteer in so many different ways, right? So you volunteer your time with the Pirate Eye as a host. I know you volunteer at Seton Hall with Adelante. So my question for you is, what caused you to stay as a volunteer? Why are you so involved?
One is I love this podcast, right? I launched it. I'm so emotionally attached to it, and I enjoy it. I enjoy sitting with folks. I enjoy hearing people's stories. I alluded to something earlier when I started working at Files One News, and I was a video journalist there. And I had mentioned something like it was super transformative. It was quite a learning experience. It's because 3 times a week I was learning from people.
Mm,
I learned so much about life by asking someone to share their story, a life that I will never understand, right? That I will never be able to live. I
Right.
spoke to people who were jewelers. I spoke to people who were doing community murals. I spoke to people who were, leading rallies and protests for workers' rights. I
Wow.
spoke to so many different types of people from so many different walks of life doing so many different things. And I learned. I learned about the world. I learned about life. I learned about society. I learned about the things that move people. And I love that. I love that. I love getting that insight. So when I sit and I do this podcast, I love hearing the other person's story. I love hearing what moves them. I love hearing the passion. I love hearing how they overcame adversity, or how a mentor just was, the critical person in their life that got them from A to B, or that helped them become who they are, right? I love hearing a story, because if you were to take one piece out from that story, the whole thing changes,
Yep.
right? The whole trajectory of their life changes. And there's not many times in which we get to sit here and really learn in that way. And I'm a big proponent of learning from other people. And I do believe that you can learn from anyone in
Mm.
many ways, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. And I want to hold on to, I like holding on to that. So this is one of the reasons that I'm still involved as a volunteer on the Pirates Eye podcast. The other reason I'm involved in Seton Hall in general, which is I try to stay in communication with Adelante, and I try to be present as much as possible, is because the folks who were involved in Adelante when I was a student, the folks who were involved in my life through Seton Hall when I was a student, and some of the names, I can't name everybody, but some of the names I want to make sure that I do name is Viviana Zambrano, Emmanuel Mercedes, Dr. Emmanuel Mercedes, Rosario Reyes, Kyle Warren are some of the key figures during my time at Seton Hall who really saw me for who I was, and who supported me, and who empowered me. And without them, I just don't, I can't imagine what my Seton Hall experience would be like, right? Like,
Mhm.
to have people that believe in you, that want to see you become a leader, that want to see you grow, that are investing their time in you, their experience, their knowledge, to see them pushing you in that way is 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 really motivating. It gives you a feeling that's very hard to explain.
Yeah.
And so if I if I received that, then I do feel that it is my duty and it's my responsibility to give whatever I can give to whoever is also willing to receive it or who needs
Yeah.
it. So in terms of being involved, I want to be able to do that too. Maybe I can't do it to the same capacity, or maybe I can. I don't know. But at least I want to try. And when I was at Seton Hall, the fact that Adelante existed, it existed because alumni before me, who, when they were students, they fought for it to exist,
Mm.
right? They made a statement. They really had to push for it to exist,
Yeah.
because they recognized that there was a need to have a community for students like me. So I feel that it's necessary for all of us who benefit from that space to honor that legacy and to make sure that it continues, right? Because it
Yeah.
would be a shame if one day then that space is no longer available after so many of us used it, after so many of us benefited from it. Then we need to support it and make sure that it exists for the future
Mhm.
generations of Seton Hall students too.
Wow. I totally agree with that. Coming from my institution was Montclair State, so my college rather. But like having that, just like you mentioned, they built a Black alumni channel like that we still go on through alumni, and just having someone that looks like you, right? Someone that can kind of relate to the same experiences, and in a whole world where like when you're a college freshman, I'm pretty sure you related to this earlier, where you're there and it's like this is a brand new world for me. You're the girl from Jersey City to coming all the way down to South Orange, and it's
Yeah.
like all right, it's a whole different ballgame here. Like
Yeah.
now, it's probably less of people that look like you. It's things you got to learn that you're probably not used to. So having like that alumni support, having a group of people that can formulate that and keep it going is something that I think is huge. You can't trade
Yep. I agree.
Yeah. So final takeaway I would say is if listeners didn't get anything else from this, final takeaway, if listeners got nothing else from this episode, what do you want to make sure the Seton Hall community walks away with after today?
I would say that what I would want people to walk away with is what I just touched upon, which is the importance of legacy, the importance of supporting students, the importance of being present. I think that we have a beautiful sense of community at Seton Hall. And within that general sense of community, there's pockets of communities, right? And those are like sacred spaces. And my experience was Adelante, but I've spoken to so many alumni. There's another experience, right? There's another group. There's a fraternity or a sorority, or there's a work study. There's WSOU. There's a college or a school. There's so many different pockets of communities, right? That we all belong to as alumni. And so whatever that pocket of community is that was meaningful to your experience, I know we're busy. I know we're carrying careers and families, and we're in different parts of the country or the world, but there's still a way to be involved. And I think the purpose of involvement is to think about the lives that you're going to be involved in, right? Or with. It's the investment in lives. It's the investment in young people. Sometimes I feel like people think about it as the investment in the institution, like this abstract, like the institution. The institution is just a place that holds lives, right? Yeah. And so that's what we're giving back to. And so what do you want your legacy to be as part of the general Seton Hall story? We all, like, no matter what, if you went to Seton Hall or you worked at Seton Hall, like, you're part of the Seton Hall story. And so what is the legacy then you want to leave behind, if you want to leave one behind?
What's a pirate? Always a pirate,
right? I would say so.
Well, thank you, Viannca, for allowing me to be the host for this one day. Unfortunately, I got to give it back, but
maybe we'll have you back around. Maybe we'll have you back around, Aaron. This was a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun. Thanks for allowing me to do this. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for letting me share my story.
Of course, anytime.
Thank you again, Viannca, for allowing us to put the spotlight on you in this episode of the Pirate's Eye podcast. If you'd like to become a volunteer and follow in Viannca's footsteps, visit shu.edu/volunteer.